The AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, is made possible by contributions from our listeners. Want to do more? Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click Donate. And thank you for allowing us to be your voice. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. Todd Gitlin, a chronicler of the New Left and the progressive movement, says anti-Trump forces must keep up everyday resistance and widen the circle of people who are committed to fighting. Author Gene Stone says progressives need to pick and choose issues and fight only winnable battles. And Bill Press talks with Senator Amy Klobuchar about the Trump administration's nefarious ties with Russia. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Columbia University professor Todd Gitlin, a longtime chronicler of progressive politics, urges the left to nail down a simple program that appeals to the general public. And we say hello to Todd Gitlin, professor of journalism and sociology and chair of the PhD program in communications at Columbia University. He was also president of Students for a Democratic Society, an anti-war activist, and he's the author of the book, The 60s, Years of Hope, Days of Rage. Todd Gitlin, thanks very much for joining us today on AmericasDemocrats.org.
You're quite welcome.
And nice to have you with us. As a prominent historian of social movements, you have written that progressives are not as good as the Tea Party in raising money, manipulating media, and showing a seriousness about gaining and holding power. How do we overcome those deficits?
Those things are all correct. We have an undisciplined crowd on the left. Some of them don't believe in the necessity of pursuing party politics because they think that's dispensable and intrinsically corrupt, disqualifyingly corrupt. We have a great profusion of identity-based groups who often have trouble converging on coalition politics, which is the only kind of politics that matters in the world of actual power. So, that these are impediments without question, and it takes a powerful discipline to undertake the steady work of politics, which is often not the most thrilling work in the world. There's work that has to be done, and it's not necessarily play. It has to be undertaken, and so people have to show up. It's all hands on deck. I don't know if Democrats are ready. I mean, my judgment is that the authorities in the Democratic Party don't know even now what hit them. I think they do not understand, or at least not for public consumption, understand how they became a moribund organization. I don't think they understand how they came to depend on Wall Street money, which they thought relieved them of the obligation to be a people's party. I think that it's not just that heads need to roll. It's not just that we need a new head of the DNC. I mean, this is show up and rethink time for anybody who has worked in or thinks they need to work in the Democratic Party. This is serious business. And the model pursued by Democrats, and I should say by the Democratic presidents, at least since the 70s, has not been conducive to getting real about what needs to be done. So, I think it's pretty well known that neither Jimmy Carter nor Bill Clinton nor Barack Obama actually did anything to try to bolster the Democratic Party. The presidential, in a presidential system, the presidents tend to go off on their own. They're not party builders. And the fact that we have a one-man band in the White House encourages them to think that the party, the base, is dispensable, and that is a very, very deep and ingrained error.
All the forgotten people that, as we find out in post-election polls, turned and voted for Trump. I mean, that's basically who you just described right there.
Well, some of them did, and I think even more of them just stayed home. They didn't think it was their game. They were suspicious of Hillary Clinton for one reason or another. They didn't like the kind of campaign she was running. They were ignorant of what was at stake. But it has to be said that the Democratic Party was not putting forward a straightforward statement about who they are and what they're for, that they are the People's Party, or they aspire to be, that they want to make America fair, that they want to affirm that we are all Americans. I mean, it was very clear if you looked at Trump's website what he was about. I mean, it was a bombastic and in many ways idiotic, his slogan, "Make America Great Again," but it was a statement. It was a ringing statement. Stronger together is not a ringing statement. That sounds like a coach meeting with his team during a timeout and trying to encourage them to be nicer, to be more cooperative, to play better defense. That was, I think it has to be said, pathetic. And there's something else I want to say about the Democratic Party. To a degree that I find alarming, much of the work of the Democratic Party has been turned over to the professional data analysts, data gatherers, and pollsters who don't know the country, who have no relevant experience with local operatives, and thus it was that when calls went out from Michigan and Wisconsin and elsewhere during the latter weeks of the Clinton campaign, the data people were patting each other on the back. They're sure they had this in the bag. You cannot have a political party run by technicians. Period. Full stop.
Why don't progressive movements, for instance, Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, or others, why don't they produce candidates for office the way that the Tea Party groups seem to have done?
Well, that's a good question, and I think it's easy for me to answer about the Occupy Wall Street movement. First of all, it wasn't really a movement, and secondly, it doesn't believe in leadership. It didn't believe in demands. It discouraged demand. It wanted everybody to participate in every decision. The kind of people who dig in to do long-term politics did not want to take up their positions in Zuccotti Park or one or another of the encampments that were the crucible of Occupy Wall Street. It was simply these people did deplore politics. They didn't even want to. There was an awful moment when John Lewis, congressman from Atlanta, was actually prevented from speaking in a rally because a bunch of, I'd say left-wing lunatics said, "Well, why should he take priority? Why jump him to the top of the line?" That tells you so much about their cluelessness about politics.
We're speaking with Todd Gitlin, professor of journalism and sociology and chair of the PhD program in communications at Columbia University. He's also the author of the book, The 60s, Years of Hope, Days of Rage. Now, Todd, if you could wave a wand, how would you gather all the identity and interest groups on the left and unite them into a strong political movement?
I would nail down a brief, pointed program with, not a list, not a long list of commonalities in which the appeal to people in general is the primary core. So building infrastructure with public spending, not private boondoggling, would be uppermost on my list. So would green industry and renewables would be uppermost on my list. Preserving and enlarging entitlement programs would be uppermost on my list. And yes, there would be a place for the distinguishing features of the various identity groups. But have to play in the orchestra. If they don't, then we get discordance, we get wasted effort, we get reinforcement of the idea out in much of white America that the left, cares about everybody but them. That is a poisonous assumption, and it was able to win a majority of votes. It was not able to win, as we all know, a majority of electoral college votes. So everybody has to get serious about winning, and and nothing. That's it. Winning.
Mm-hmm. So in the meantime, then how should the Trump opponents proceed? I mean, do you go out on all fronts all the time, or is it just a few issues where victory is most likely?
Well, for now, I think you go out on a lot of fronts, and a lot of people, a lot of groups will feel more urgently some of Trump's transgressions than others. So, I would expect that, for example, organizations in defense of immigrants and DACA and the Dreamers and so on will be most galvanized by opposing and finding creative ways to oppose the infringements upon America's identity as an immigrant nation. And other, lawyers will go out, out on and rightly so, on Supreme Court nominations, and the Greens, the climate change movement will go all out on theirs, and there's room for all of those. I'm powerfully for all of them. Right now, I think just keeping up the everyday resistance. Widening the circle of people who are committed. I mean, if I had my dreamy wish, I would wish that there would be tables set up at outside every post office and on every campus, card tables, the sort of things you see barely, maybe for a few days during a presidential campaign. And the table says, what do we do now? Or, now what? And these are run by activists who have the perspective that people have to be mobilized to become a Tea Party-like force. Sign up here. Here's your email list, and we will be in touch. We will be developing our local priorities depending on the situation with our member of Congress and so on, so that there's awareness not just on the days of the showy demonstrations, but constantly that this is a mass movement.
Kind of the grassroots approach that the Democratic Party used to be all about.
Well, yeah, but it's been a long time since that used to be. I'm not sure how much of that there's been for decades in America. I mean, here and there, there are real Democratic parties. I happen to live on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, and there is actually, there are Democratic groups who work. But in much of America, could you find a Democratic Party? Is there one in a storefront that's thrown its doors open and is inviting people in? I don't think so. The party is a presence in the most cosmopolitan metropolitan areas, and not elsewhere, and that has to change.
Mm-hmm. Before we let you go, last year you wrote that Trump's campaign seemed to echo, the campaign of George Wallace in 1968. Now it seems worse to me. What can we look forward to? What can we do about it? Is it more women's march on Washington type events?
In the Washington Post, I already thought it was worse because Wallace got 13.5% of the vote. Nixon co-opted a great deal of what Wallace was stirring up, including the violence. So a lot of people who were made uneasy by Wallace voted for Nixon because they thought he would take care of law and order by shoring up the police and the National Guard and so on. This is worse because there is no, because Trump has managed a more or less hostile takeover of the entire Republican Party. And the fringe violence, I think, will not be long in coming. I mean, it crops up in the form of attacks on Muslims and Mexicans and others. So I would anticipate that we'll be seeing more of that. I mean, this is a much more dangerous situation, as horrific as that one seemed to be all those decades ago. Fortunately, there was a Supreme Court when Nixon was president that was not under his thumb. And there were, the Democratic Party, at least at a congressional level, was a real force. So in this sense, and moreover, Democrats controlled state houses and governorships and so on. This is worse.
Okay. Todd Gitlin, professor of journalism and sociology and chair of the PhD program in communications at Columbia University. His book, The 60s, Years of Hope, Days of Rage. Todd, as always, thank you very much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We look forward to having you back again soon.
You're quite welcome.
And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen to this americasdemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats. But we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.
This Social Security measure,
I believe that we must pass legislation to provide medical care.
This is our tradition. When our grandparents came to America, it was the Democratic Party which said, welcome. It was the Democratic Party, the party of Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy and others, who said that America belonged to all its people, not just a handful of the rich or a few giant corporations. That's why great leaders like FDR fought so hard for Social Security, and why JFK stood up to the insurance companies and their Republican allies to get Medicare. It's not just one thing, or one time, in one place. It's about a whole history of standing up to the Republicans and saying someone has to be on the side of regular working people in America, whether it's defending Social Security or just the way your loved ones are treated on the job. That's what the Democratic Party is all about. And that's why this message has been brought to you by the Democratic Party. Working people like you and me.
Paid for by 21st Century Democrats. Not authorized by any candidate or candidates committee. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Author Gene Stone has written a book called The Trump Survival Guide and offers suggestions for the resistance. We'll talk to him about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
Remember way back in time? Back in the old days of 2016. Back then, Trump was on the political stump, promising that by gollies he would stop Wall Street bankers from scamming and robbing consumers and workers. Where did that guy go? To Wall Street. Once ensconced in the White House, Trump has openly betrayed us by helping the financial powers get more power to gouge. In fact, he has even put 6 Goldman Sachs executives in America's top economic policy positions. For example, one obscure Goldman Sacker named Steve Mnuchin is now honcho of the Treasury Department, overseeing America's economy. Aside from the fact that he played an ugly role in Wall Street's foreclosure frenzy, having forced some 10,000 homeowners out of their homes, Mnuchin also has an honesty problem. In submitting his statement of personal wealth to the U.S. Senate, he failed to include $100 million in wealth that he had stashed in an offshore tax haven. Not trying to hide anything, just an oversight, he assured senators, claiming he was confused by the Senate's complicated financial reporting forms. Really? If this big-time banker can't keep track of $100 million worth of his own real estate assets, why trust him to handle the ultra-complex wealth of our nation? Is he lying or just incompetent? This is Jim Hightower saying, far from protecting us from Wall Street greed, Trump's Goldman Sachs Alumni Club is pushing so-called reforms to protect Wall Street from us. Their first move is to try killing the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the only federal agency whose only priority is to protect common consumers from credit card gouging, bank fraud, predatory payday lenders, and other corporate thievery. Trump's reforms are the biggest fraud of all. To battle them, contact Consumer Federation of America at consumerfed.org.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. Gene Stone's new book, The Trump Survival Guide, has a checklist for progressives to translate despair into activism. He advises, choose winnable battles. And we say hello to Gene Stone, who has been a book, magazine, and newspaper editor, and is the author of more than 40 books, including The Trump Survival Guide, everything you need to know about living through what you hoped would never happen. Gene Stone, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Well, thank you for having me.
Where it's our pleasure to have you with us. Your book is basically a checklist of things people can do to translate their anger and despair into activism against the Trump administration. Now, there are two schools of thought. One is to oppose everything in every way possible, and then the other would be to pick and choose winnable battles. What's your prescription?
Well, that's a tough question. I don't think anyone has the exact answer, but my sense is that winnable battles makes a great deal more sense. The Tea Party was very successful in its unified no to everything, but I don't think the left has that same ability to say no to everything. I also don't think in 2017 it's really going to be as effective a formula. So I would encourage people to pick the issue that they care about the most, and that's one reason why I divided my book into the 12 issues. Pick the one you really care about and make that your issue, and call your member of Congress, sign a petition, join an organization, but pick your battles carefully. We're not going to win every battle, but you're going to feel a lot better if the battle you pick is the one that you win.
Now, would you say you're one of those critics who say the Democratic Party needs to adopt a 50-state strategy and work more at the local level than in Congress and K Street?
Well, again, another question I don't think anybody really knows the answer to, because I've heard intelligent people arguing both things equally well. My sense is that, yes, we probably have to appeal to the whole country. I can't remember who said it, but one of the members of Congress said after the election that the Democratic Party had turned into the party of the coasts and nothing in between. So I do think that the Democrats have to appeal to rural voters and Southern voters and a lot of the people who seem to be left behind or joining the Republican Party. But I don't think in doing that they should abandon their core values. It does seem as if the younger voters are very much tilting Democratic. They're more progressive than their elders, and I don't think you want to lose those people by sacrificing the ideals that these younger voters care for.
Well, it's interesting because Democrats are notoriously unable to stick together and tend to follow particular ideological rabbit holes. Why would they suddenly acquire an organizing gene, especially at the local level?
Well, people always say that, and I think you're quite right. But under Obama, Democrats were actually, strangely, able to stick together at the congressional level. And if you think about the two signature achievements were probably Obamacare and Dodd-Frank. They were passed with zero Republican support, basically. But the Democrats actually stayed very unified on these issues. Now, obviously, there are some things like guns that Democrats do differ on. But in general, the party stays together, I think, a little more than people realize. And interestingly, I think it's the Republicans who are now starting to look more fractured. So many top-ranking Republicans refused to endorse, or they actually outright even disavowed Trump. And people like Kasich are, I think, still fighting the battle with Trump. It's an interesting question. How long will the populist Republicans and the Wall Street Republicans and the libertarian Republicans and the law and order Republicans all be able to agree on something? Because at some point, I think they may look more fractured. In general, I suspect it's easier to be unified as the party of dissent than it is to be unified as the party in power.
Yeah, well, and I think the last several years certainly point to that for sure. We're speaking with Gene Stone, book magazine, newspaper editor, and author of several books, including the Trump Survival Guide, everything you need to know about living through what you hoped would never happen. Gene, what are the top issues that progressives should focus on in the Trump administration?
Well, I think healthcare is the most obvious one. The Republicans are going to try to dismantle Obamacare, and they seem to be confident that they can do it. But when they do, there are going to be more than 20 million Americans who are going to be without health insurance. And at the moment, the GOP doesn't seem to have any replacement plan. So it looks as if they have no coherent strategy. And I think a lot of that's because they're hearing from their constituents who are saying, hey, you just can't take away my health care. I mean, you need something to replace it. Saying no works if you're a Tea Party member and you say no to everything. But if you're a Congress and you have a constituency, you have to be responsible to those people. So I think healthcare is probably the major thing that the Democrats can concentrate on.
Do you think that concentrating on social issues like gay rights, women's rights, Black Lives Matter, could that actually detract from bringing white working class men back into the fold?
Well, I feel really strongly about this one. To me, gay rights, black rights, and women's rights, these are human rights. These are civil rights. These aren't special rights. These are important things that the Democrats shouldn't compromise on. I'm not saying it should be their top priority, but they mustn't back down on being the party of accepting the rights of all Americans and ensuring that everybody in our country is treated equally and with respect. And I also suspect that groups like Black Lives Matter, these are the groups that are mobilizing the future of the party. And the party has to accept that their younger voters are more liberal, they're more outspoken, and they feel strongly about women's rights and Black Lives Matters and gay rights and such. These are issues that the Democrats can't just trade away or pretend aren't important. And I also suspect that for all the talk about working class whites not feeling comfortable with what some Republicans call special rights, I'm not sure I really believe that. I would like to think that in America, we still believe that all lives matter, all people are important, and nobody should have more rights than anyone else.
Part of the problem there, too, is that you get a lot of fake news. You get a lot of people reporting things that aren't quite accurate, and all of a sudden they're forming opinions based on non-truths.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Fake news is a huge problem.
Yeah, I mean, there's just things that are just made up, and it's, hey, gosh, did you hear about that? So that's pretty scary to think about. Generally speaking, how do you think can the average citizen exert pressure on elected officials to maintain the advances of the Obama administration against the likely assault on them from Trump?
Well, I think the most important thing you can do, and I say this in the book, and in fact, at the end of my book, I give a template for how to do this, which is call your representative. That is the single most important thing you can do. You call your local office first, and then you call the district, the D.C. office. Talking to actual people who are working for your representatives is actually an extremely effective and important way to make your opinion heard. As you remember, a while ago, the Republicans tried to get rid of the Ethics Committee, and it seems as if the major reason that was stopped is that so many people called in and said, you can't do this. You people came into office saying that you were going to drain the swamp and be ethical, and the first thing you're trying to do is get rid of the Ethics Office, and that's wrong. And the way that Congress still works is this sense that they have responsibility to their voters because basically they have a job and they want to be reelected. So I do feel that the most important thing you can do is to call your representative.
Very good. Gene Stone, book magazine, newspaper editor, author of several books, including The Trump Survival Guide, everything you need to know about living through what you hoped would never happen. Gene, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org. We do appreciate your time and look forward to having you back again soon.
Oh, thank you very much.
You're quite welcome. And this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to keep the AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, on the air, and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is AmericasDemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press talks with Senator Amy Klobuchar about what's going on between the Trump administration and Russia.
We hadn't planned to visit with her today, but we're very excited.
On our listen line.
That our good friend, Senator Amy Klobuchar, listening in, called and said, love to join us this morning. And we welcome the great senator from Minnesota here to the program. Senator Klobuchar, good to talk to you.
Well, thanks, Bill. It's great to be on.
Thank you.
A lot going on around here.
Oh, my God, yeah. Now, we do want to mention, of course, you were on the Senate Judiciary Committee and recently came back from a trip to the Baltics with Senator McCain and Senator Graham. I'll bet the Baltics are pretty nervous about Russian influence and Russian plans right now. Did you find that?
They are, and there is a record number of volunteers signing up for their military. We also went to Ukraine and Georgia, went to the front line with the Ukrainian troops on New Year's Eve with President Poroshenko. And, 10,000 people have been killed in that country since Russia illegally invaded Crimea as well as eastern Ukraine. And it is something that finally people are paying attention to. But one of the things that I was most shocked by and what is relevant to everything that's been going on yesterday with the Flynn resignation is that what happened in America with that election was not unique. It wasn't just one candidate, it wasn't just one political party, not just one country. 7 years ago, in 2007, in Estonia, the Estonians moved a Russian statue of a soldier from a square to a cemetery. And the Russians didn't like that. What they do, they shut off their internet. In Lithuania, they invite members of the Ukrainian parliament that were in exile from Crimea to their 25th anniversary celebration of independence from Russia. What does Russia do? Hack into their parliamentarians' accounts. This is a modus operandi. They've been doing this all over the world. That is why President Obama put those sanctions on. And as we know, as the rest splashed on every front page of every newspaper, the day he put those sanctions on, which were widely supported, was the day that Flynn called up the Russian ambassador, and we don't know exactly what was said, but clearly the implications are that assured him that something would change with the Trump administration.
Right. Now that Michael Flynn, we were originally told, has resigned. Yesterday we were told Donald Trump fired him. Is that the end of the story when it comes to Trump connections to the Russian government?
Well, of course not. Today we learn, and the public learns at least, that there have been numerous contacts made between the Trump campaign and Russian intelligence. Obviously, many of these have been recorded, it appears, over time, and there's reasons that people at least know if they don't have the recordings, they know the contacts have been made because that is not out of the ordinary at all that our country would be tracking what's going on with the Russians. And so I think that whether or not those people knew they were going to be tracked, they were tracked. And the kind of things we've been hearing from the president, including this morning, where he tweeted out that this was somehow all of this is going on to make up for Hillary Clinton's campaign. Are you kidding me? This is a serious threat, not just to our democracy, but to all democracies around the world. You can't just let this happen and have a foreign government try to influence our election and do nothing about it, and then the response would be to placate them, to say, oh, hey, Putin's a strong leader. I mean, those are the things we're seeing. So I think the questions we want answered and why way back on January 4th, we came out, a few of us, for a bill for an independent commission with Representative Schiff in the House and Senator Cardin and myself. And we came out for a bill that puts that independent commission in place because we want to know, it's not just Flynn. Who were they talking to? What was said? When did it happen? And most importantly, why? What is the motivation, and what does that mean for America and our foreign policy and our democracy? And that's why we think it's so important to have the independent commission.
An independent commission, which, as I understand so far, Senate Leader Mitch McConnell has said there's no need for, correct?
He has said that, and I will say, Bill, the Intelligence Committee is really important. They're doing their investigation. I have a lot of faith in Mark Warner and really everyone on there. And you know that Senator McCain and Graham for months have been way out there on this in terms of pushing that this was wrong and that we needed to get the facts. And so while they are not on the bill for the independent commission, they've clearly been leaders in saying that we need to uncover the facts. So my position is let the Intelligence Committee do their work. There is no reason we can't do both things at the same time.
And a big difference, right, is that the Intelligence Committee does their work behind closed doors, right? The Independent Commission would be public hearings. Is that right?
That's correct. That's correct. And also we can have judiciary hearings that Lindsey Graham is pushing for. So I'm hopeful we'll have those on our committee as well. But the bottom line is we have to get out what classified information that they can discover is important, what can be unclassified is important, of course, to get to the truth. And then also we've got to find out everything about how we can prevent this from happening in the future.
So, Senator Amy Klobuchar from Minnesota, our guest here on the Bill Press Show this Wednesday, February 15. One of the big questions that we've been trying to, that I think remains unanswered is, and Senator Graham spoke to this the other day, I'd love to get your take, did Michael Flynn go rogue? Did he act on his own, or was he directed to make that call?
We don't know that, and you know I'm a former prosecutor. I like to see the evidence first, and we do not know that, but certainly the American people have a right to know that.
What's your gut tell you?
And when you hear about all of these contacts with the campaign through the last year with the Trump campaign, it makes you think he certainly wasn't the only person talking to Russia. We know that Paul Manafort, the campaign chair, resigned over his connections with Russia. It's not just one resignation that happened yesterday. It is what's been going on for the entire past year.
What is your take? Senator Graham said it's more likely, right, that he was advised and a part of an ongoing operation, which, as you point out, we learned overnight about all these contacts, Paul Manafort and others throughout the campaign, throughout the transition. So we are, and I know you've got to go soon. I'll make this my last question, Senator. So we're less than a month into the Trump presidency. What's your impression of what you've seen so far?
Well, it's been a lot of chaos, and it's been a lot of things that I think everyone knew were his campaign promises, right? And I knew that he'd be doing things that I didn't agree with. Okay. But did I ever think he would put out this broad refugee ban that would affect every country in the world and, thousands of people in my own state? No. Did I think he would do it without vetting it with the people on the front line and cause illegal people that are supposed to be here or just going for a funeral and want to come back to not be able to come back to our country? No, I didn't think they would go that far. So I think what's made people real is not the fact that he's making good on some of his promises, but it's the methods, it's the language, it's the tweets, it's the continuation of a campaigning instead of switching to governing, which is a very different challenge and really something when you're president of the United States. We always say you try to find common ground. You really have to find higher ground in terms of being the president for all people and not just the people that elected you. And it doesn't feel that he's made that transition, and that is like the understatement of the year.
Hey, thanks so much for getting in touch with us this morning, Senator. And thanks especially for joining us. Look forward to catching up with you again soon. All right.
Thank you, Bill.
That's all for AmericasDemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Todd Gitlin, Gene Stone, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For AmericasDemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us. Support the AmericasDemocrats.org podcast, a project of 21st Century Democrats, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to AmericasDemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page.